Welcome to the Henry Cecil McVey Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence at Wiley University. I'm your host, Dr. Ouida McAfee. Joining me today are Wiley University's Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs and Professor of Higher Education Administration, Dr. Morris Thomas, and International POD President, Dr. Carl Moore. Today, we will be discussing the high-impact practice of Centers for Teaching and Learning, which are trending and popular, but they're not on every campus. So, Provost Thomas, would you tell us why having a Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence is important to the campus of Wiley University?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. McAfee, Assistant Provost McAfee, for having me here and for that question. So I'll start kind of where you ended. You mentioned that Centers for Teaching and Learning, which we call in this field of faculty or educational development, we call them CETLs in short order. Well, in the United States, about a third of all universities have a CETL. However, to note, every research one, every research two has CETLs. And then HBCUs follow the same trend of about the third of institutions having a CETL. So being that for me within the higher education sector, having really gotten my academic affairs journey being positioned in Centers for Teaching and Learning, and really having my research even prior to being formally in this role back all the way to dissertation, which I rarely reference my dissertation. That was 18 years ago. I've published many things since then, but since my dissertation, I've been dealing with aspects around teaching and learning and student development. So that was always, so it was a natural progression, even though at the time when I actually did my research as a student, as a graduate student, I didn't even know about CETLs or this field. That was always an interest for me. So fast forward to the question about why it's important at a place like Wiley. Well, the research that I actually conduct, which is on the learning environments and the learning experiences of our students and of the faculty, it is so key to understand not just our subject matter expertise, but how we facilitate, how we create these learning opportunities. All faculty, in most instances across all institutions, hire faculty who have subject matter expertise. They don't necessarily understand all of the learning theories. I'll mention some of the big four. So you have behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and cognitivism and connectivism in the teaching and learning sphere. They don't understand those particular components. And then there's many other theories and models, universal design for learning. So if you only have subject matter expertise, and when you're prepared to be a faculty, you're not going through like education preparation programs for like teachers in secondary education. Where do you get this information that's vital to address these students? Then when you add to that, there's such an ever evolving higher education landscape where students are different. Students are coming to us in all places. And I like to reference on a regular basis my colleague here at Wiley University, Dr. Amazon. She's our Vice President for Student Development. And she mentions how institutions have to be ready for students as opposed to students being ready. And one thing that the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence does is it helps us to not only be ready, but to stay ready. So it becomes a hub for faculty to constantly work on continuous improvement, which we know is extremely important. But to wrap up my answer, it's really important that we have named this center. One of the first initiatives I've had as being the provost here was to launch the center and name it, and then put very capable people like yourself, Assistant Provost for Innovation, Dr. Ouida McAfee, at the helm, with also faculty leadership to run different sides of it. So the naming of it was really important. One of the major centers in the United States had a naming, and I think that helped it become one of the top centers of teaching and learning. And I'll reference and shout out the Sheridan Teaching and Learning Center at Brown University. And so I don't know who Sheridan was, and that wasn't important to me, but excuse me for saying that. But what I do know is the naming of things is really important, and the work that was happening in that center. I know a few colleagues who work there. I know that naming is really strategic. And so at Wiley University, there's such a rich history in teaching and teaching and learning. It is a premier liberal arts institution. It has a rich legacy. And so I was thinking like we need to name this for the purposes of understanding its significance. And so I wanted to name it for an alumni of Ouida University. And so Dr. Henry Cecil McVeigh actually graduated from Wiley University in 1934. I'm going to reference a few notes here. He was a organic chemistry major. And one thing that was really interesting about Dr. Henry Cecil McVeigh is that he worked through his studies to be able to put himself through school. That's really important because our Center for Teaching and Learning, while they are focused on faculty, it is about our end user, which is our learners or our scholars. And so from the time that he was a scholar, he represented the type of student who is still at Wiley, a student who may need to work their way through, a student who does not have a lot of means or privileges in all instances. And then after that, he went on to earn his PhD in chemistry. And then not only that, he taught for 41 years in the higher education system at HBCUs, Atlanta University, which is now Clark Atlanta, Morehouse Spelman, and he taught there for 41 years. And in his teaching, he was able to educate more than 50 African Americans to go on and earn their PhDs in the sciences. He co-founded the National Organization for Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers, and he was the first Martin Luther King Jr. visiting scholar at MIT and received numerous excellence teaching awards. So that name, when our faculty at Wiley University come into that center and enter and take a part, I want that name to sit there and rest with them and be a part of the ethos and the mindset that we're going to be people who would do great things and be great as faculty members, like Dr. Henry Cecil McVeigh, but that we also will produce greatness like he did as well.
Thank you, Provost Thomas. Dr. Moore, you're the president of the largest faculty/education professional development network in North America. And I know you've spent many years working to improve teaching and learning. So what personal experiences have shaped your perspective on the value of CETL? You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow. So I think going back, I'm a first generation college student. So the personal experience, the first one is just being a learner. I was fortunate enough to have a household with a lot of love. And when my mother would encourage me, with, I had one of those mothers, there was nothing that she um, could see that I couldn't do, right? And she would support me more than anyone in the world. So having that as a child and then growing up and then hitting certain educational roadblocks, right? And as Dr. Thomas had mentioned a moment ago about the one colleague that speaks about institutions needing to be better for students, it's kind of like I was viewed as an underprepared student, but it was really encountering these instances of underprepared institutions that didn't have the actual bandwidth, the space, the time for my unique genius to show up. So I think that was the number one experience for me. I remember learning how to learn in college, and although I really appreciate those muscles and those competencies, some of us, our students, come to college and not necessarily they want to be taught as well. They need to learn how to learn, but they actually need the learning facilitated. So for me, as an undergraduate student, really experiencing lots of instances where my unique genius wasn't allowed to show up. And then when I was as a professional, I actually went to the Ohio State University for graduate school in educational policy and leadership and studying like human development, leadership development, and knowing that how to work with students. What was interesting is when I became an advising director at Temple University and working with advisors, I would have students that were quote unquote the problem students that I would have to speak with. And the personal experience as a professional that has really impacted is that there were a number of students that were really begging me, hey, talk to my professor, talk to the chair of the department. They've sent me all through. And then I started to realize that we needed support. We need support professionally for folks to be able to kind of linking back to what Dr. Thomas had mentioned earlier, not necessarily having that support around the professional learning and the upskilling as faculty members and those who actually transmit knowledge. So my personal experience as a youngster in education, just coming through and wanting to do my best in school and hitting all these educational roadblocks, it causes a little bit of dissonance because it's different when you believe in yourself. I'm like, I'm not accepting no for an answer. I know I can learn. I've learned how to walk, talk, drive. I've learned a lot of things, how to juggle a job while doing sports, et cetera. And this is something I'm going to learn as well. So I started to think about going in education and challenging institutions only to know how to support students and then learning how to support faculty members. So those experiences really, and then I guess I would say my third one is working as a provost when I was serving in my first provost role as an interim. That experience really shaped and the question is, shape my view of the CTL. Can you repeat that again?
Yes, your view of the CTL. Mhm.
Yeah, when I was working, I recognize how a CTL can really be an agent of change because I part of my professional career, I was like kind of like vying for resources and saying, hey, can you please support this department or support these faculty, et cetera, when I started to do more so faculty and educational development. But working as a provost and realizing how whether it's IT and human resources, finance, and how we could actually facilitate and be like a centralizing agent for learning on campus. That's when the power of the actual organizational strength and operational readiness for an institution that individuals that know they're highly skilled in how to see what objectives are there, what activities need to be done, and what evidence and leading itself to even being more effective in terms of strategic planning processes, right? So that personal experience when I was younger, the kind of career experience, but then also in leadership have all shaped my view around CTLs.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. That leads me into the next question. Dr. Thomas, how does running a CETL at an HBCU differ from doing so at other institutions?
Well, I think I may also lean on Dr. Moore to chime in on this if I may, but I will give my perspective because I love to be transparent. While I've done work with CETLs at and colleagues of CETLs at non-HBCUs, I've only been privileged to do CETL work at HBCUs, and so I'm happy to have done that. So as far as leading them. But to answer your question, is what I can say is my philosophy and thoughts around a CETL is to be created in a manner that supports the institution's mission. And again, I always say that our end users, so to speak, are our scholars. And so, because I have now uh, thanks actually to Dr. Moore, who really formally brought me into this work with my first role in this at the University of the District of Columbia, where he was, as he mentioned, became the provost. Interim or not, you were doing the provost role, becoming the provost. And with his ascension, I was left to formulate and launch and serve as the inaugural director of the Center for Advancement of Learning, which is a CETO at UDC. And in that role, I was able to launch a CETO. And our CETO at UDC, for instance, was based on UDC's structure and what UDC's initiatives and priorities were. Then I transitioned and became the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and Assessment at Howard University, which is another HBCU. And so the way that I did and ran and formulated my professional development model for faculty at Howard differed greatly based on, one, the timing, because I transitioned to Howard University at the onset of the pandemic.
Hmm.
So the timing, so situational factors that we talk about in D, Fink's significant learning theories, really those type of best practices and things directed how that CETO was structured. And
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
student population or the scholars at Howard are different, some of the programs were different. Some of the focus and what's happening in the world and also in technology differed at Howard. So, for instance, when we were at UDC, in that timing, generative AI was not being talked
Hmm.
about and used in the same manner, even though generative AI was not non-existent. It had not really been and embarked and really penetrated, so to speak, the higher education landscape. So at Howard now, with that being the focus and more digital online learning, more technology, more disruptive technologies and tools, that focus is different. Then I get to a Wiley University that didn't have one. Again, one thing that was different for me, being able to name it, I thought the naming so that we were really clear on the type of faculty we want
Right.
to
Right.
address, but also the scholars. But then at Wiley, our student population is different. Our degrees are different. Our size is different. So some of the things that you know, because you are in the leadership that we're addressing, are things like making our faculty aware of how to address learners where there might be higher instances of DFW rates. So
Mm-hmm.
there's evidence-based practices and research and interventions that have been done around that. A focus like that at an institution like Howard may not be needed, but that's a need for our faculty to understand at a place like at Wiley. So HBCUs, I think a great thing, and it is a point to really pause and provide emphasis. I just mentioned three distinct HBCUs. Every HBCU is different. Actually, all of those HBCUs that I just mentioned, it's just three, have different Carnegie classifications. They have different geographic locations, different sizes, different affiliation. One is public, one is
Hmm.
private, federally chartered, one is private and affiliated with a religious organization. And so I think the CETOs need to reflect and respond to the environment. And as far as the difference, I'm going to shift over to Dr. Moore to talk about, because he's worked in both PWIs and HBCUs, and he is the city president of the network. So he is working with everyone and leading in that. And I also want to pause and just make that's a huge actual accomplishment for anyone to get to that space. And I know and have known and worked with him personally for a long time, and he certainly is deserving of that seat. He has been
No.
committed
Yes.
and dedicated to that work at a very high level. And he has really uh, consumed the Kool-Aid of faculty educational
Thank
development. So Dr.
you.
Moore, if you could really help on the side of the differences, because I'll be honest, I've only been in leadership at HBCUs around this, and proud to say that, but there is something I can't answer the comparison.
Yeah, definitely. And the differences in how they function or how they work, what would be best to drill into?
Well, I would say so. I mentioned how there's differences of how to approach it at an HBCU, and I talked about the three HBCUs and their
Hmm. Hmm.
differences. So I know you worked at Temple's CETO,
Hmm.
if I remember
Yeah.
correctly.
Yes. Yes. Hmm.
And so that specifically, so
Yeah.
Temple is not an HBCU; it's a large PWI research-run institution, and you're
Hmm.
working doing it at HBCUs versus, so for instance, just that micro example of Temple. What was the difference in what the difference between your work at HBCU CETO and Temple CETO?
Yeah. This is a really great question because I don't get a chance to ever speak to this. Um, and it's a really, and also I was at a community college as well, working with the CETO there, and then have consulted and worked with CETOs at a number of PWIs. And now working with the Faculty Development Network through my role as executive fellow at Propel, it does give a wide range of variance, which needs to be articulated. So thanks, Dr. Thomas, for that. And I appreciate the kind words as well, because it takes a hard worker to know a hard worker, right? In terms of the excellence that you bring to everything you do. So I think the primary difference between the Centers for Teaching and Learning at PWI's predominantly white institutions and those, I think the context, the mission, and the alignment and the focus, we all have that context, the alignment, and the focus. But there's something about when working at a larger PWI, right? So I'm thinking the larger ones in which the work of teaching and learning can actually be drowned out. And it can be more so about research. So the research one institution. So the faculty economy or what value their teaching has. It's not like they're not tons of schools that are teaching in amazing ways and valuing it. But when the research is valued, the energy and the actual mission, many students and even faculty members may not have come to the institution because there was the great teaching. It's more about the culture and the experience and all of that other stuff. So it's a different energy in the broadest sense. When you're looking at HBCUs, I haven't found any HBCU yet where a faculty member or student didn't go there for the feeling and the education part, right? For that kind of connection point. Now, I know that there are research one. Dr. Thomas was at Howard, and I know Wiley, your history as well, and what you're emerging continue to become. So, not that there isn't amazing research happening, but I do think that energy, PWIs emphasize pedagogical innovation, technology integration, evidence-based practices. Their focus tends on improving instructional design and assessment, of course. But by contrast, HBCUs are inherently like mission-driven in their CTLs, community centered. When they are there, many times it's like a faculty member, right, or few, but they emphasize whether we call what's it like liberatory pedagogy or education, belonging. It's foundational. It's not a peripheral thing. It's not like a program. And I know that at some of the other PWIs, it may have been more programmatic and great. I have colleagues that are doing amazing work, but it's kind of built in, right? Like whether it's culturally responsive or appropriate or as part of my research as of past several years of like humanizing is baked in. So I think one of the pieces that I also really love, and I'm being heavy on HBCUs because I know that you're Wiley, is the mentoring element that comes with this. Every school doesn't do it. I know some of y'all are HBCUs that don't have it, but whether it's a chair or a community cluster, what have you, I've been seeing some of that. So moreover, because of the resource constraints, um, necessity breeds ingenuity. So I found lots of large scale innovation happening. So while PWIs focus on advancing pedagogy through innovation, and there are a lot of really great work, like my colleagues at Temple, I do work with folks at UVA, the course design work I've been doing with them, et cetera. HBCUs focus on advancing through that what we call like liberatory education for advancement of the culture of of the people of our folks. It's just an energy thing. It's the mission of the institution overlapping with the mission of the center. So hopefully that gives a little bit, but not going too deep and hitting the sweet spot there. Because I want to speak more about it, but I'm going to stop because I know we don't have tons of time. What do you think, Dr. Thomas? Does that cover some of it for you?
Yes, absolutely, it did. I like how you pointed out that, in especially the larger R1 PWI spaces, that it is very research centric because there's not the same
Hmm.
teaching load, and they have more TAs and things of that nature. So, like for
Yep. Yeah. I
instance,
remember.
for even Howard being an R1, even those HBCUs, so we kind of do the both and. But for instance, we provide training and things for TAs as another part of what we do because there's such a large TA contingency, and our TA contingency, TA contingency at Howard when I was there was not as large as PWIs. I mean, the teaching is primarily done at some PWIs and
By the TAs.
by
Yep.
TAs. So see those, like you said, get into some differences for
Mhm.
faculty in those spaces based on the composition. So yeah, you
Yeah,
definitely.
and I want to share this one last thing. You know what I'm really excited about, especially for you all at Wiley, but then specifically HBCUs because of the legacy and the cultural imprint that we usually have. I'm not saying it's there always, but I do think that teaching and learning can be a vehicle for like healing, and empowerment and social transformation in that way, because learning is healing and healing is learning. And one of those things that when we kind of take the whole human and look at this as opportunity, and it comes with part of the work that we do. And the world is going to continue to be learning. They will have the opportunity to learn from, it's kind of like the stone that the builder refused becomes the head cornerstone. I think it's about Marley Stone song, where HBCUs were birthed out of the fact that couldn't get into some other PWIs. So then the innovation that it bred or it breeds can actually really be something that's like a guiding light for us in terms of that healing. So I'm excited about the work that I know y'all are going to do there and that is happening at HBCUs in that regard.
Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Moore, for our final question, and then Dr. or Provost Thomas will wrap up for us. For other administrators who are looking to establish or even strengthen a CETL at an HBCU, what practical advice would you offer?
Okay. So administrators should approach the leadership of a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning uh, as stewards of a living system. I'm big into really using biological references and correspondence for how we can really see and move. And I really do think looking as a living system, like a living ecosystem in which they are really a core part of that, the nervous system of the institution, rather than just managing a static unit. So when you look at the nervous system of an institution, there's crisis, there's changes in which you can really facilitate the peace. And the CETO can thrive when it's grounded, right? And clear purpose and responsiveness to the needs of the faculty members and institution, broader mission, those connections. So approaching administrative work as like um, with diplomacy and needing to learn what's happening around campus and all of the units, but then also being able to be that one that's that centralizing agent. So they should cultivate a culture of trust, collaboration, reflective practice. And I'm not saying they have to be superhuman, but it's one that views faculty not just as like a, hey, we're going to deliver this information, but as learners and designers and, partners. There's a bunch of stuff coming up for me. I want to make sure to not make this too long, but equally important is balancing that structure that and adaptability, because I do know that there are certain protocols and practices and like I'll call it the hardware to put into place. Um, and as much as they can get things on paper, and I learned this from Dr. Thomas, if it's not in writing, right, we have to make sure that they are working in whatever way so they can combine that like operational framework with some of this hard and soft, the funding, the communication, and there's an experimentation part, right? And and an interdisciplinary connection. So you're experimenting with so many different pieces. They literally have to be a person who's willing to learn and be kind of like an amoeba of sorts with continuous learning. So administrators should invest in professional and emotional well-being of themselves, number one, because we've all been worked to the grindstone, right? That's how I'm gonna say it again, emotional well-being of themselves, model inclusive and human-centered leadership. And I'm big on that type of work to ensure that, they're working with humans and they're being a human in doing so. Where there's pedagogical or instructional excellence, the technological fluency is huge. That's like at front and center, and human development, they're all intersecting. So in that ecosystem. So those are the elements that I would say an administrator should really be keying in on if they are leading a center.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. Provost Thomas, so what are your thoughts or advice that you have for other administrators?
Oh, I echo the sentiment that Dr. Moore mentioned about making sure that the leaders themselves have taken care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I have a teaching and learning model. One of the teaching and learning models that I have is called the whole experience framework. And most often when I present on that, one of the final things I say is, remember, you're at the center of the whole experience, or you're at the center of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not about just what we say, but people are going to get who we are. we're going to bring that into spaces. And so I think we have to take care of ourselves with all of what I call the leads, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, all of the leads have
Mhm.
to be in order because that is what people are going to get from us. And then when you're taking care of all of those, there's also the intellectual component. So you have to consistently be a really voracious learner. You have yourself. You have to constantly be willing to learn about things you didn't know. I remember someone in a session, I do a lot of presentations, I don't remember which one, but someone was like, but all of this stuff is happening with AI and we're just overwhelmed. And I said to them, I said, do you think I fell out of the AI planet? I was like, I had to learn this as well. So I'm not presenting this because I knew something more or I was in a place where I was privy to this prior to. So the understanding that you would consistently need to be on the cutting edge, be a practitioner, be an experimenter, as Dr. Moore mentioned, be an early adopter to research and engage into these new disruptive technologies, this information that's happening, these different practices to understand. I'm just kind of echoing some of the things, the cross-disciplinary aspect, and even understanding. So I am certainly not a neurologist, but I really do look at how elements of neurology impact elements of learning and things of that nature. So be able to look and connect the dots between other areas of expertise. So where you can speak to not only technologists, but the medical professionals, the different things of that nature to all understand how we can better improve and center the learners' environments and experiences for their learning and their attainment and success to become what they want it to be.
Thank you, Provost Morris Thomas and Dr. Carl S. Moore for the discussion on the high impact practice of centers teaching, learning, and excellence. Everyone, until next time, go forth inspired.